Hello, I am Kevin Anderson.
And I'm Adam Okada.
And we are clinical educators and hosts of the Ask the Educator podcast, brought to you by Healthmark, a Getting a company.
Are you a sterile processing technician, infection preventionist, or biomedical engineer? No matter your role, if you're involved in medical device processing, this podcast is for you. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools for excellence in medical device processing.
Now let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Ask the Educator podcast. This is Kevin Anderson, your host. And with me, as always, I have Adam Okada as co-host. And as our special guest for this episode, we have Harry Oussoren. Harry, welcome back. I think we had you and Adam before Adam was with Healthmark. We had both of you on the podcast on episode 11. And now here we are again, and it's like episode 100 and whatever. So it's been a little bit of an adventure for us, but it's great to have you back. One of the things that our listeners may not know is that you were recently on one of our international webinars, providing education. And that's what we want to do, is we want to kind of provide in this podcast episode a little bit of a broad overview of what you covered in that webinar. So in that webinar, you talked a lot about Borescopes specifically, and a lot of research studies were referenced in that presentation. So what do you think were some of the important findings in that research regarding Borescope inspections?
Well, hi, Kevin and Adam. And as you already mentioned, I met Adam online a long time ago, but I also had the privilege to meet him in real life, and I really like that. And I really like the idea of these webinars and these podcasts, since everybody can learn from that. And education, to me, is the most important part of our job, since in that way we will learn. And that also means that you need to know your research that has been done, and you need to know your background and your history. So when I was preparing this webinar, I searched on ResearchGate or PubMed or whatever, and there you can find very interesting papers that have been published. And what you see in some of the papers is that patient infections related to contaminated endoscopes were discovered. And not only once, it happened several times already. And even in 2024, there was an interesting publication that had the title, "Is Biofilm Accumulation on Endoscope Tubing a Contributing Failure is it contributed to the failure of the cleaning and decontamination process?" And to me, it shows that should we have updated it already earlier, all our processes, should we take more effort in how we can detect everything that is going on in this Pandora's box, as I will explain to you in my webinar what I mean by a Pandora box. So go to the webinar and listen to what I mean with that. And what you see is that we always do this, but we're always walking a little bit behind the reality. But what I look for and what I see in the world, that everybody's taking a lot of care and effort in cleaning and disinfection all these flexible endoscopes, and still we find something. So we need to continue to get it better, to get it updated, and to update each other on our improvements that we do, and show and share our results.
Yeah, Harry, and well, this feels like old times. You and I were here on the Ask the Educator podcast like 4 or 5 years ago. It's been a while, but it's good to see you back. And the webinar has my favorite title of any webinar we've ever done, which is Columbus's Egg for Pandora's Box. And you give a great explanation in there of what that title means. So if you haven't seen it, go check out the webinar. But I think what the studies really show is that, first of all, flexible endoscopes are very complicated to clean. But the second thing is that they're all saying that we really need to have some form of better inspection because of how complex these devices are. So what do you think are the arguments for that visual inspection step, and specifically visual inspection with a borescope?
I think this is very important to do. So there are a lot of ways that you can check your flexible endoscopes, but before you have the results, it most of the time takes a lot of time. And I like to check our endoscopes just before they go into our patient. So to a patient-ready endoscope, because that means that we have finished all our procedures and it should be cleaned and disinfected to be safe to go into our patient. And when you use a borescope, you can directly see what's inside, you can directly act, and if something failed, you can say, okay, this scope is not going to be used. If you would do it by a culturing method, which is also a very important measurement that you have to take, but if you do it like that, it will take you 2, 3, maybe 4 days before you get a result. And then you have to wash your flexible endoscope over again or reprocess it again after you did your culturing. And we all know as well that if you do a reprocessing, it will not be very good for your endoscope. So it will possibly damage it a little bit or tear it a little bit, etc., etc. So for the health of your endoscope, this is also very important to do it. But most important for me is I can directly see what is going on in my endoscope if I see something which is not supposed to be there. The downside of a borescope is that you won't see microorganisms because we all know you cannot see these things. So culturing or whatever other method that you plan to use or that the IFU states you that you have to use is very good. You should do this in addition with a borescope.
One thing I like to think about when it comes to borescoping the scope is, people generally accept that, some diagnostic and procedural things can be done with an endoscope on human beings, but we have not been able to look inside of the scope until recently with a borescope. And you're doing the same thing. You're using that direct visualization to diagnose whether or not that scope is safe for patient use. And it makes perfect sense to me, the way you put it like that. It's that direct visualization. And, thankfully we have the technology to do that. But you had mentioned also something very interesting about culturing scopes. But when it comes to direct visualization, we're talking about looking at debris or damage or foreign objects or things like that. Obviously not to the microscopic level as a culture does, which kind of leads me to the next question, which is, what about cleaning verification tools? Because those are also there in our toolbox in case we want to try and see if something see the inside of the scope. Is it clean? Maybe something we can still find that we can't necessarily visually see, sort of like a protein residual test or ATP, that kind of thing. Do you think those tools are still important to use in conjunction with borescopic visual inspection? What do you think about that?
Yeah, what I like is what you say about in conjunction with. So that I think we should adapt ourselves that borescoping is going to be there and is not going to leave. And in my presentation, it's just like you said a little bit. I named a quote for: if you only have a hammer, all you are looking for is a nail. And now all of a sudden we have a new hammer, which is our borescope, so we can look further than this nail. And in the past, we have used this protein test, the ATP test, we use them a lot, and we know that amongst professionals, there is a lot of discussion. Is it a contributing factor? For example, if you're talking about ATP test, you have a lot of different companies providing this ATP test, and then you get different results. So you need to know for sure what to look for in this LLUs. And sometimes people say that even if a microorganism is already dead, which means it's not viable for a patient anymore, but if it's already dead, it still produces ATP. So it might be possible that it is a false positive. So you can discuss, but to me, everything you do to make sure that your procedure, because this is what you do, you check your cleaning and disinfection procedure if you did it right. And we all know a lot of things are still manual. And if you do it manual, there is a possibility that, for example, you, Gavin, you will be very clean in your house and maybe very clean in your endoscopes, and you do it thoroughly for, let's say, 30 minutes, and you say, this now is clean. I will do it maybe in 5 minutes, and I also say it's clean. So we both say it's clean, but there's a different outcome, I think, if we do whatever test we are going to do. So I believe, at least in culturing, but if you're going to culture your endoscope, make sure you are using the right method. If you do the brush, flush, brush method, for example, and also that you don't use saline, but you use the other media that's already there. Because my good friend Lionel Pinot, he produced some very interesting papers. He did over 90,000 culturings. So I think he knows what he is talking about. So borescoping together with culturing, for me, is very good, and everything else might help, but make sure that it's in your eye view, that you know what you are doing and you know how to interpret your results.
Yeah, and you make a really good point, because it's kind of that combination. You can do visual inspection, and sometimes you don't know what you're looking for, but the culturing, the microbial surveillance, all of these things that we have at our disposal, these are scientific tools that we can use to make patients safer. So anything we can do, even if it takes longer to make that process effective, we should take that extra time to do those things. And one of the things you mentioned in the webinar also was, in addition to borescopes and visual inspection, and we have this microbial surveillance that we can do, you also talked about artificial intelligence and AI, and how the use of AI can really improve the use of the borescope. Can you talk a little bit about, kind of summarize what you talked about in the webinar about AI and what's coming?
Yeah, that's no problem at all. I don't know if the listeners to this podcast have ever done a borescoping themselves, but I can show you in my webinar. I will show you some pictures of what you can see if you look inside an endoscope. And sometimes when I started to use the borescopes, I didn't even know what I was looking at. So I thought, my God, this whole endoscope is damaged or whatever. And then they said, now relax, it's supposed to be there. Even some of the markings that are from manufacturers already inside your endoscope. And I thought, uh-oh, something is wrong. So if you are going to use a borescope, make sure that you have someone who can help you in training from what you see. And then still it goes up to the interpretation of what a human eye will see. So if you are going to use artificial intelligence to help you with that, because it automatically detects, labels, and counts the differences inside the lumens of a flexible endoscope that should not be there. It overcomes guesses and interpretation. You can immediately keep a record, because after your procedure with your borescope with AI, it shows you a record of the numbers, the counts, etc., and in what place. And you can also use that in your quality management system. So this is, for me, the most important part. And the second is that the training of technicians, their experience and the techniques they use becomes a little less important, that because AI takes over most of their tasks. But that does not mean that our technicians or their experience and their techniques are not important anymore, because they are highly important, since they are the ones who should be skilled, trained to reprocess our endoscopes. And with our borescope and our AI, we check if the procedure that was written down and being performed by these people is still the best that we can do. Or maybe we can do even better. Coming back to this hammer and nail thing I already mentioned, I think with borescoping and AI, we found a new hammer. But I truly believe that in the future, there will be a new nail that we need to find. So we will need a new hammer, maybe a smaller borescope, or maybe better artificial intelligence. I don't know what. So I cannot look in the future, but it might help us. And I think it will help us very much to make our procedures better, to give a safe inspection of your flexible endoscopes, and to make sure that if you're going to handle over your patient-ready endoscope to be put and placed inside a patient, it is as safe as you could have done.
Yeah, I can appreciate what you said there about when you first started putting borescopes and endoscopes and you weren't really sure what you were looking at. We were kind of one of those early adopters with borescopes in the endoscope processing room as well. And we ran into question after question and it kind of didn't really know what we were up against either. And that's one of the problems, I guess, that you run into as an early adopter and what have you. But hopefully, like you said, with artificial intelligence, at least that will shorten our learning curve. It will give us a tool in our belt that will help us make decisions and make our process stronger and our decision making stronger. You know, if we see, you know, artificial intelligence say something is debris, then maybe we re-clean. If we see that it says it's damaged, oh, we send it out for repair. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to, you know, struggle as much as we did in the beginning, trying to learn what exactly we were looking at. So
Exactly. I think a lot of people should be happy that we already pioneered before them. But this is what artificial intelligence for me might help us very much. There's the one downside of the artificial intelligence is that the database that we are going to use is being filled by experts. So make sure that it's really filled by experts, because AI depends on the data that was already put inside. And I think a lot of some companies that I know of, they did a very good job in making sure to have done that. And still, it's important, but also to in your quality management system, this record, because it means that sometimes you see something with your bare eye, with your borescope eye, or with your artificial intelligence. So let's state that we see something, whatever with AI. So we decide to reprocess our endoscope. And if we still see it in the same place, in the same spot, we know exactly where to our the people who are going to repair our endoscope, saying, okay, at that point, there's my problem. So make sure that that problem is solved. And one of the other advantages of borescoping together with AI is you can detect some defects in an early stage. So if you detect it in an early stage, you might decide to ship it already to a repair company or whatever, saying, okay, this is my problem. And your repair will be much cheaper than if it's done later, and maybe your whole scope is already damaged. So I think, and there are some publications already about that it can save you a lot of cost in your repair. But of course, before that, you have to buy a borescope, you have to buy artificial intelligence. So it will cost you some money, but I'm sure that in the end, it will save you a lot of money. It will save you a lot of problems with your patients. So let's say, what are the costs of one patient that has got an infection by an endoscope? And we could have prevented it with a borescope with AI. No discussion with whatever CEO or CFO or whatever in your hospital anymore, because these costs are very high. And compared to buying a borescope, it is nothing. So please buy your borescope, start using it, use artificial intelligence together with that, and it will help you, it will save you a lot of money, and you can prove that you did what was best according to the possibilities that you have. So I will also mention something about that in my webinar. So I think from what I'm trying to say is that it is important to use a borescope. It is important to use artificial intelligence, and I will show you in my webinar with some pictures, so you can actually see what you should see or should not see in your endoscopes, in the lumens of your endoscopes. So even if you don't use AI for whatever reason that you do, there are some items that you have to look for, and AI does this as well. It's called the 4Ds. It's debris, damage, discoloration, and it's our droplets. So also drying of your flexible endoscope prevents you from a lot of infection. And I think Michele, no, not only I think, I know, Michele Alfa produced a very interesting paper about that also the drying time. So the question is, and I also address this in my webinar, at what point in the total reprocessing cycle of a flexible endoscope should you use your borescope? And I will tell you everything about my opinion about when to do it, how to do it, and with whom you should do it.
Yeah, and I think that was one of my favorite parts of that webinar was some of the visuals that you use, the pictures that you actually see inside the board or with the borescope inside of flexible scopes, inside those channels. Really amazing visuals. So go check it out if you have a chance. Harry, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with on borescope inspection?
Yeah, the most important is go and check the webinar. And if you have any questions, please send them to Healthmark and they will send it to me and we can answer every question.
Excellent. Thank you, Harry. Just to kind of reiterate, go check out the webinar. You're going to see all the visuals that go along with Harry's presentation, learn a little bit more about what you're looking at on the inside of your endoscopes. There's a lot of great visuals there. You can find it at hmark.com under the education tab, under the webinars. You click on webinars, and then there's a past webinars section, and that's where you're going to find this webinar at. And if you have trouble finding that webinar in accordance with the directions I just gave you, you can always reach out to asktheeducator at hmark.com for that information. We will send you the link directly. But Harry, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and on the webinar. It was a great webinar, supported by a lot of research, which I always like about you, Harry, and other colleagues throughout the industry that use that as their rationale and their backbone for their arguments. So really appreciate that part. But go check out the webinar, and as always, keep listening, keep subscribing, keep sharing the podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. All opinions expressed on this episode are those of the presenters. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Before using any medical device, it's important to review the manufacturer's instructions for use and consult with a professional.
For any questions or feedback, please reach out to us at asktheeducator@hmark.com.